At its peak, Tupperware had 3.1 million sellers in 100 countries and a product in nearly every kitchen in America. A party started somewhere on the planet every 2.5 seconds. The seal, a patented two-step hiss of air that kept food fresh for weeks, was so perfectly engineered that the Museum of Modern Art displayed it as fine art. Then, decision by decision, it was taken apart. $1 billion in stock buybacks at peak prices, funded with borrowed money, an e-commerce site that didn't launch until 2021, 25 years after Amazon, 4 CEOs in 6 years, a sales force that shrank from 3 million to less than 300,000. In September 2024, the company filed for bankruptcy carrying $812 million in debt. The lenders bought the brand for $23.5 million in cash. The Florida headquarters, where women once dug for diamond rings in the dirt, is now listed for cold storage. This is the story of a tinkerer who turned industrial waste into an American icon, a single mother who built a sales revolution and was erased from history, and a boardroom that spent $1 billion on the present while the future slipped away. The containers are still in kitchens across America, airtight, unbreakable, outlasting everything except the empire that made them. Chapter 1: The Tinkerer and the Slag. The story begins with a kid on a New Hampshire farm who wanted to be rich and never quite figured out how. Earl Silas Tupper was born July 28, 1907 in Berlin, New Hampshire, the only child of Ernest Leslie Tupper, a farmer who held exactly one patent in his life, for a frame that helped clean chickens, and Lulu Clark Tupper, who took in laundry and ran a boarding house to keep the family fed. They moved to central Massachusetts when Earl was about 3, bouncing between farms until his parents settled into running a greenhouse and nursery in Shirley, selling what they advertised as the biggest selection of geraniums in the area. Earl barely graduated high school in 1925. In a school essay written the year before, the 17-year-old scribbled a sentence that would follow him for decades. What a time we would have if we had plenty of money. He worked as a mail clerk, labored on a railroad crew, studied briefly at Bryant College in Providence, took correspondence courses in business and science, trained as a tree surgeon, and in 1928 launched the Tupper Tree Doctors Company. He vowed he'd be a millionaire by 30. The Great Depression had other plans. His tree business went bankrupt in 1936. He was married to Marie Whitcomb by then, with 5 children eventually, broke, restless, scribbling ideas in the small notepads he carried everywhere. His sons later remembered him jotting notes about better hospital gurneys while being wheeled into an operating room on his own stretcher. He fancied himself a latter-day Leonardo da Vinci. His inventions included a fish-powered boat, a no-drip ice cream cone, dagger-shaped combs, permanently creased pants, corsets, garter belt hooks, and a streamlined sled. None of them made a dime. Then in 1937, a man named Bernard Doyle changed everything. Doyle was an inventor associated with DuPont's Viscaloid Cellulosic Plastics division in Leominster, Massachusetts, a small city that happened to be the birthplace of the American plastics industry. Tupper went to work at DuPont's Doyle Works plant, and as he later said, "My education really began." He stayed only a year, but in those 12 months, he absorbed everything about plastics manufacturing, the chemistry, the molding, the possibilities that nobody else seemed to see in the material. What DuPont gave him, besides knowledge, was waste. Polyethylene slag, a byproduct of oil refining that was, in its raw state, black, hard, putrid, and unworkable. Other manufacturers threw it away. Tupper looked at it and saw something no one else did. He developed a proprietary refining process that purified this industrial garbage into a substance he called poly-T, material of the future. Flexible, tough, non-porous, translucent, odorless, non-toxic. He built his own injection molding machine. He refused to use the word plastic because, as he put it, a lot of plastic that is made is junk. And to prove his product was different, he painted the corners of his factory floor bright white, so every speck of dirt was visible, while every other factory owner in America painted their corners black to hide it. In 1946, he introduced the Wonderleer bowl, 39 cents. A year later, he patented the invention that would define the 20th century American kitchen. Patent number 2,487,400, the Tupper seal, modeled on a paint can lid, except in reverse. You pressed the lid down, lifted one edge slightly to burp out excess air, and created a partial vacuum, airtight, watertight. The soft hiss of expelled air became one of the most distinctive sounds in American consumer culture. House Beautiful called it fine art for 39 cents. The Museum of Modern Art in New York displayed Tupper's bowls as early as 1947. Plastic, for the first time, elevated to art, and nobody bought it. Chapter 2. Fine Art. That nobody wanted between 1946 and 1948, Tupper tried everything. Department stores, hardware stores, a showroom on Fifth Avenue. He even experimented with giving the bowls away as cigarette purchase giveaways. The products sat on shelves. The problem was brutally simple, and it was twofold. First, plastics had a terrible reputation in 1940s. America, consumers associated the material with things that were brittle, slimy, smelly, and cheap. Second, the patented seal, the very thing that made Tupperware revolutionary, required a physical demonstration. You had to feel the burp. You had to hear the hiss. You had to watch someone throw a water-filled bowl across the room and see it land without spilling. No amount of advertising could replace the experience of holding the thing in your hands. Sales were steady but modest. Earl Tupper had engineered a perfect product and placed it in a sales channel that couldn't sell it. He had the right thing at the right time, in the wrong place. The context matters. Post-war America was in the middle of the largest suburban expansion in human history. Millions of new homes, millions of new kitchens, women who'd built bombers and riveted fuselages during the war, now being pushed back into homemaking. Television sets went from 1 million American households in 1949 to 160 million sets within a decade. An entire consumer culture was being born. And somewhere in Detroit, a single mother with no stock, no contract, and no college degree was about to look at Tupper's unsellable product and see what he couldn't. Chapter 3. The Woman Who Built the Party. Brownie. May Humphrey was born May 25, 1913 in Buford, Georgia, a small town near Atlanta. They called her Brownie for her big brown eyes. Her father, Jerome, a plumber, abandoned the family when she was 2. Her mother, Rose, became a union organizer for the hatmakers, traveling constantly, leaving Brownie to be raised by her Aunt Pearl, a dressmaker. By 14, she was delivering speeches at union rallies and people noticed. Biographer Bob Keeling would later write that she awed people. She could paint, too. In 1936, she won a contest to create a mural at the Texas Centennial in Dallas, where she met Robert W. Wise, a Ford Motor Company exhibit manager. They married that December. Their son, Jerry, was born in May 1938. The marriage disintegrated fast. Robert was violent and alcoholic. He reportedly threw a bottle of acid at his own mother-in-law. Brownie filed for divorce in 1941. What followed was a decade of survival. She contributed to the Detroit News under the pen name Hibiscus. She sold clothing. She worked as executive secretary at Bendix Aviation during the war. And then she found Stanley Home Products, a company that sold household goods through home demonstration parties. Brownie became one of Stanley's top sellers in the country. When she asked founder Frank Beveridge about moving into management, he told her not to waste her time. Management, he said, was no place for a woman. Brownie Wise didn't argue with Frank Beveridge. She simply left and proved him wrong on a scale he couldn't have imagined. She encountered Tupperware in the late 1940s and recognized instantly what Earl Tupper had missed. The seal didn't need better advertising. It needed a living room. She began holding home parties, throwing containers across the room to prove durability, tossing water-filled bowls to demonstrate the airtight seal, making women laugh and gasp and reach for their pocketbooks. By October 1949, she'd recruited 19 dealers in Detroit. By the end of that year, Wise and her team had moved over $150,000 worth of Tupperware, equivalent to roughly $1.7 million today, more than any retail store in America was selling. Meanwhile, in Everett, Massachusetts, an Italian immigrant named Tom Damigella was achieving the same results through home demonstrations. In 1948, Tupper gathered Wise, Damigella, and roughly 16 to 20 other independent distributors at a Sheraton hotel in Worcester, Massachusetts, to discuss a radical idea. The pivotal decision came in 1951. Tupper pulled Tupperware entirely out of retail stores. Every department store, every hardware store, every shelf in America, gone. From that point forward, the only way to buy Tupperware was at a party, in someone's home, from someone you knew. It was the most counterintuitive distribution decision in American consumer history. And it worked because of one woman. In May 1951, Earl Tupper appointed Brownie Wise as vice president and general manager of the newly formed Tupperware Home Parties, Inc. It was an unprecedented position for a woman in American corporate life. Keeling described her as having the people skills of Dale Carnegie, the looks of Doris Day, and the magnetism of Eva Peron. Her philosophy fit in a single sentence. If we build the people, they'll build the business. She meant it literally. The Tupperware Party model worked on social mechanics so elegant they'd be studied in business schools for decades. A hostess invited friends and neighbors to her home. A trained dealer demonstrated the products. The hostess received free merchandise as compensation for lending her social network. Dealers used a technique called carrot calling, going door to door asking housewives to compare carrots stored in Tupperware versus open containers, then booking parties on the spot when the Tupperware carrots stayed crisp and the other one wilted. But Wise understood something deeper than sales technique. She understood that millions of American women in the early 1950s were trapped, educated enough to be restless, talented enough to want more, and told by an entire culture that their place was in the kitchen. Tupperware didn't just give them something to sell. It gave them recognition, achievement, applause, trophies, luxury goods, public praise, things that women, as Wise knew from her own life, got very little of elsewhere. The network exploded. Roughly 200 women in 1951, over 9,000 by 1954, 20,000 dealers and distributors shortly after. Sales hit $25 million in 1954, over $230 million in today's dollars. Top distributors, many operating as husband and wife teams, earned $35,000 to $50,000 a year, when the average American man brought home around $5,000. Chapter 4. The Sound of the Seal. To understand what was lost, you have to understand what the product actually was, not as a brand, not as a business model, as a physical object in your hands. Original Tupperware was made from low-density polyethylene that Tupper had refined from DuPont's waste slag. Collectors describe vintage pieces as having a distinctly softer, more flexible texture than anything else in the plastics world. a polished, waxy feel with thick, precisely molded walls. The material didn't smell. It didn't leave greasy residue. Its polyethylene structure resisted staining, warping, and cracking in ways that nothing else on the market could match. You could freeze it. You could drop it on a tile floor. You could hand it to a toddler and not worry. And then there was the seal. The Tupper seal wasn't a snap. It wasn't a click. It was a two-step ritual. Press down, lift one edge, and then that soft, unmistakable hiss. A tiny exhale of air leaving the container as the partial vacuum formed. Airtight. Watertight. A sound so specific that anyone who grew up in a kitchen that had Tupperware can close their eyes and hear it now. The burp wasn't a gimmick. It was the engineering. And it couldn't be experienced through a screen, a catalog, or an advertisement. You had to be there. You had to feel it. The product line that grew around that seal traced a cultural history of the American kitchen. The Wonderlier bowl, those nesting bowls with the airtight lids, textured on the inside to prevent scratching, 39 cents each. Ice tups, popsicle molds with flexible, unbreakable polyethylene sticks, $1 for 6. Now in MoMA's permanent collection. The Party Susan, a divided, lazy Susan serving tray for the entertaining craze of the 50s. The Cervelier canisters introduced in 1962 with the sunburst pattern Instant Touch lid seal, sized to fit the larger package of Ritz crackers. Modular mates in the 80s, the definitive American pantry organization system. Fridge smart containers in the late 90s with adjustable vents calibrated to different types of produce. The Shape-O toy, a bright plastic ball with cut-out geometric shapes, became one of the most recognized children's toys of its era. And the colors. The colors were the calendar. 1950s pastels, gentle pink, baby blue, pale yellow, frosted crystal, raspberry and orange. Then the palette that became the most iconic in Tupperware history. 1970s earth tones. Avocado green, harvest gold, burnt orange, harvest brown. If you opened a cabinet in a house built between 1968 and 1982, those were the colors staring back at you. 80s jewel tones followed. Teal, bright pink, dusty rose. And after that, nothing ever captured the same resonance. The lifetime guarantee arrived in the 1960s, and it meant exactly what it said. Chipping, cracking, breaking, peeling, warping, all covered under normal non-commercial use for the life of the product. A consumer could contact a consultant, provide the mold number stamped on the bottom, and receive a free replacement or voucher. People tested this warranty decades after purchase. It held. A product so well made that the company promised to replace it forever, because they almost never had to. The Kissimmee, Florida headquarters told you everything about what Tupperware believed it was. Earl Tupper had purchased the land in 1951, over 1,000 acres, making Tupperware one of the largest landowners in Florida. The 43-acre campus featured contemporary white modernist buildings, a performing arts center and auditorium, the Friendship Fountain, the Confidence Center Museum open to the public, and landscaped gardens. Biographer Keeling called it the Magic Kingdom in Orlando, many years before Walt Disney ever came around. Tupperware predated Disney World as the region's landmark corporate presence by nearly 2 decades, and every spring the faithful came home. The annual Tupperware Homecoming Jubilee, first held in April 1954, became the stuff of American sales legend. The first Jubilee featured a Wild West theme and an event called Dig for Gold, $50,000 worth of prizes buried in Tupperware containers beneath the Florida soil. 600 women in cowboy hats dropped to their knees and dug for mink stoles, freezer units, gold watches, diamond rings, televisions, and new cars. A dealer named Faye Macalupo of Buffalo dug up a toy car, When she saw the real Ford it represented, she planted her face against the hood and began to weep, repeating, "I love everybody." Staff hadn't accounted for the swampy Florida soil. Some prizes took hours to recover. A few weren't found for years. On April 17, 1954, Brownie Wise became the first woman to appear on the cover of Businessweek. It was the pinnacle of her public triumph, the highest point a woman had reached in American corporate life, and the beginning of the end of everything between her and the man whose name was on the product. The women who built the empire were remarkable in their own right. Lee Walker, a Filipino war bride who couldn't get a teaching job because of her accent, started selling Tupperware in July 1953 and found economic independence she'd been denied everywhere else. Lavon Weber, who'd grown up during the Oklahoma Dust Bowl, started selling in July 1954 and was promoted to a full distributorship in Wichita, Kansas by September 1955. Mary and Frank Sirianni left their GM factory and luncheonette jobs in January 1953 to sell Tupperware full-time. Jo DeVellis, a young mother recruited by Tom Damigella in 1955, sold Tupperware for 35 years. Tom and his wife, Ann, née Mazzarino, who'd emigrated from Sicily in 1925, built the longest operating original Tupperware distributorship from Everett, Massachusetts. These weren't executives. They were neighbors, mothers, immigrants. Women who'd been told in 100 different ways that ambition wasn't for them. Tupperware didn't just give them products to sell. It gave them a reason to leave the house, a community that applauded their effort, and a paycheck with their own name on it. Somewhere on the planet, a Tupperware party was starting every 2.5 seconds. The company didn't advertise on television. It didn't need to. It had 3 million salespeople, and every one of them believed. Chapter 5, The Summit and the Silence. That followed, the Golden Age rolled forward like something that couldn't be stopped. Under Rexall and Dart Industries ownership after Earl Tupper sold the company in 1958, sales doubled every 5 years. Revenue exceeded $500 million by 1976. A Tupperware party occurred somewhere on the planet every 1.5 to 2.5 seconds at peak activity. International expansion reached Canada in 1958, Weybridge, England by 1960, and by 1965 the company operated across 6 European countries plus Singapore, Japan, and Australia. The Hemingway, South Carolina manufacturing plant opened in April 1976, sprawled across 1.1 million square feet, injection molding machines running cycle times of 3 to 45 seconds depending on the mold, employing up to 1,300 workers at its peak. Additional plants ran in Belgium, Brazil, South Korea, Japan, Portugal, South Africa, Mexico, China, and India. By the mid-1990s, 85% of revenues and 95% of profits came from international operations. Tupperware had become something almost no American consumer brand achieves, more powerful abroad than at home. In May 1996, Primark International spun off Tupperware as an independent public company on the New York Stock Exchange. Ticker symbol TUP. Shares opened at approximately $42 and quickly climbed to $55. Revenue stood at $1.4 billion. Earnings, $235 million. The rationale was simple. Tupperware's growth was being held back by Primark's slower divisions. Set it free and watch it run. But there is something Earl Tupper never lived to see, and Brownie Wise never lived to see, and perhaps neither of them would have understood. Because the thing that made Tupperware great, the physical, tactile, human connection between a woman demonstrating a product and a neighbor reaching out to feel it, was about to become the thing that made Tupperware irrelevant. Before we reach that unraveling, though, there's a debt to settle. A story the company tried to bury. As Brownie Wise's fame grew through the mid-1950s, Earl Tupper's resentment grew with it. He was an eccentric, secretive man who never appeared anywhere socially and would only speak to people one-on-one. She was flamboyant, charismatic, and increasingly treated by the press as the genius behind Tupperware's success. When media coverage began suggesting she could sell any product equally well, that it was Brownie, not the bowl, that mattered, Tupper couldn't stand it any longer. On January 28, 1958, Earl Tupper and the board of directors fired Brownie Wise. She held no company stock. She had no formal contract. She filed a $1.6 million lawsuit for conspiracy and breach of contract. It settled out of court for approximately $30,000, 1 year's salary. Then Tupper did something worse than firing her. He erased her. He wrote corporate histories deposited at the Smithsonian Institution that entirely left out Wise's contribution to the company. Executives at the Kissimmee headquarters dug a hole on the corporate property and dumped copies of her self-help book into it. Her name vanished from the company's official story as completely as if she'd never existed. 6 months later, in July 1958, Tupper sold the entire company to Justin Dart's Rexall Drug Company for $16 million. He divorced his wife, Marie, renounced his U.S. citizenship to avoid taxes, bought an island off the coast of Costa Rica, and spent his remaining years tinkering with inventions that never went anywhere. He died of a heart attack on October 3, 1983 in San Jose at 76. At the time of his death, the company he'd abandoned was doing $800 million a year. Brownie Wise launched several cosmetics ventures: Cinderella International, Vivienne Woodard Cosmetics, others. None came close. She grew reclusive, staying near her home on Lake Tohopekalaga in Kissimmee, working as a ceramic artist. She died September 24, 1992, at 79, after a long illness. She does not have a gravestone. Her papers were donated to the Smithsonian in 1994 by her son, Jerry. In 2016, 58 years after the firing, Tupperware donated $200,000 to establish Brownie Wise Park on an island in the lake she lived beside. The man who built the product couldn't sell it. The woman who built the sales empire was destroyed for building it too well. And the company they created together was about to enter a long twilight, where neither engineering genius nor salesmanship would be enough. Because the forces gathering against Tupperware weren't just competitive, they were structural, financial, and ultimately fatal. Revenue would peak. The stock would climb past $96 a share. 3.1 million people around the world would carry the Tupperware name, and none of it, not a single dollar of it, would be enough to survive what came next. Chapter 6. The patents run out. The first cracks didn't come from Wall Street. They came from a calendar. Tupperware's original patents expired in the mid-1980s. The seal patent in 1984, the year after Earl Tupper's death. For nearly 4 decades, the burp had been proprietary. No competitor could legally replicate the two-step press and lift mechanism that made every Tupperware lid airtight. The moment those patents lapsed, the engineering advantage that had built the empire became public domain. Documentary filmmaker Laurie Kahn put it plainly. The company missed an opportunity in the 1980s and 90s when Earl's patents were running out. If Tupperware had diversified, they'd still be alive today. What rushed through that open door was a flood. Rubbermaid, founded in 1920, acquired by Newell in 1999 for $6 billion, became the dominant retail food storage brand by doing exactly what Tupperware refused to do, selling through Walmart, Target, and every big-box retailer in America. A Rubbermaid 40-piece take-alongs Set cost roughly $14 to $16 at Walmart. A comparable Tupperware set ran $28 to $60 or more, a 2 to 5 times price premium that grew harder to justify with every passing year. Glad and Ziploc entered rigid containers. Sterilite and generic store brands multiplied. OXO emerged as a premium alternative you could actually buy in a store. Then came the wave that nobody in Kissimmee saw coming. Amazon Basics and ultra-cheap Chinese manufacturers flooding online marketplaces with containers sold for pennies on the dollar. After 2008, the BPA health scare accelerated a consumer shift toward glass. Pyrex, Anchor Hocking, Snapware, materials that felt safer, looked cleaner, survived the microwave without warping. Tupperware didn't launch a glass line until 2022. 22 years after the trend began, an almost incomprehensible delay from a company that had once been synonymous with food storage innovation. And then there was the quiet revolution that killed the party model from below. The meal prep phenomenon, accelerating around 2014 through Instagram fitness culture, drove massive demand for cheap, compartmentalized, stackable containers sold in bulk on Amazon. $15 to $20 for a set large enough to fill an entire refrigerator shelf. The global food storage container market reached approximately $148 to $173 billion by 2024, growing at 4.5% annually. The market was expanding. Tupperware's share of it was shrinking. Marketing professor Hank Boyd of the University of Maryland identified the irony that sat at the center of everything. Tupperware lasts so long that once you've bought a set, you probably don't need to buy another one for 10 years, maybe more. The product's supreme engineering virtue, its indestructibility, was its business model's death sentence. Every kitchen in America that already owned Tupperware was a kitchen that didn't need to buy more. And the free plastic containers from restaurant takeout orders? They worked well enough for a generation that had never heard the burp and didn't know what they were missing. But the competition, the patent expiration, the cultural shifts, these were forces that a well-run company with a strong balance sheet and a clear-eyed leadership team could have navigated. What made them fatal was what happened inside the boardroom. Chapter 7. The CEO Who Bought Back the Future. Everett Vernon Rick Goings was born October 13, 1945. A Vietnam-era Navy veteran, he'd spent years at Avon in multiple executive roles. President of Avon USA, President of Avon Germany, before joining Tupperware in 1992 as President of Tupperware Worldwide. He became Chairman and CEO in 1997 and held the role for 21 years. No single person outside the Tupper family shaped the company's trajectory more than Rick Goings, and no single person bears more responsibility for the financial condition that made bankruptcy inevitable. His strategy had 3 pillars: aggressive international expansion, beauty brand diversification, and financial engineering. The first 2 were defensible. The third was devastating. Goings understood that the party model was dying in the United States. Women who'd once hosted Tupperware parties were working full-time. The women who might have sold Tupperware had careers of their own. So he shifted focus to emerging markets, Latin America, Southeast Asia, Africa, places where the party model still resonated, where women's economic circumstances more closely resembled 1950s America, and where direct selling offered genuine upward mobility. Within 4 years of becoming CEO, 95% of Tupperware's revenue came from outside the United States. It was a legitimate strategic pivot, and it worked for a while. The beauty acquisitions made a certain kind of sense, too. In 2000, Goings purchased Beauty Control for approximately $60 million. In 2005, he bought Sara Lee's direct-selling beauty business for $557 million. 6 brands operating across 18 countries: Avroy Schlan, House of Fuller, NatureCare, Nutramedics, Nuvo Cosmeticos, Swissguard. The company was renamed Tupperware Brands Corporation in December 2005. Revenue grew from approximately $1.08 billion in 1998 to a peak of approximately $2.67 billion in 2013. On paper, Rick Goings had tripled the company. But the growth masked a critical truth. The core North American Tupperware business, the original product, the original market, the place where the brand was born, was in long-term, irreversible decline. International sales and beauty revenue offset the bleeding. They didn't stop it. By 2012, beauty contributed roughly 26% of the company's $2.6 billion in revenue. But the North American beauty segment consistently underperformed, operating at approximately break-even by 2017. The international Tupperware business was carrying everything, and international markets have a way of turning volatile at exactly the wrong moment. Then there was Target. In October 2001, Goings tested selling Tupperware in Target stores. The retail channel Earl Tupper had abandoned 50 years earlier. By early 2002, Tupperware was in all 1,100 Target locations, with a trial in 25 Kroger stores as well. By September 2003, he pulled the plug. The experiment, Goings said, had a detrimental effect on direct sales and wasn't worth the effort. The direct sales force felt undermined. Consumers who'd been told Tupperware was special, exclusive, available only through a personal relationship, saw it sitting on a shelf next to Rubbermaid and wondered what the premium was for. The lesson was clear. You can't be exclusive and accessible at the same time. Goings chose exclusive. The world was choosing accessible. Now comes the decision that broke the balance sheet. Beginning in May 2007, Rick Goings authorized share repurchase programs. Over the following years, the board expanded the authorization repeatedly, ultimately reaching $2.0 billion in cumulative buyback capacity by January 2013. The stock traded between $60 and $100 per share during 2011 through 2013, peaking at approximately $96 to $100 unadjusted in late 2013. By 2017, the company had spent $1.29 billion buying back its own shares. Most of that money was borrowed. In January 2013, the board raised the quarterly dividend 72%, from 36 cents to 62 cents per share. They raised the target payout ratio from 33 to 50% of trailing adjusted earnings per share, and they explicitly raised the company's leverage targets, with SEC filings noting expected annual interest expense increases of $7 to $8 million due to higher borrowings and interest rates in conjunction with reaching the company's new leverage target. Read that again. The board didn't just authorize more debt to buy back stock at peak prices. They announced it as a target. They told the market, we intend to borrow more, and we intend to give that borrowed money to shareholders. This was not an accident. It was a strategy. Here is what $1.29 billion in buybacks could have purchased instead. It could have funded a complete e-commerce infrastructure a decade before the company finally built one. It could have financed a glass and stainless steel product line before every competitor beat them to market. It could have underwritten a digital marketing transformation, a social media sales platform, a mobile app for virtual parties, any of the tools that might have translated the human magic of the Tupperware demonstration into the digital age. $1 billion could have bought a future. Instead, it bought a vanishing present. The buybacks inflated per-share earnings, the metric that drove executive equity compensation. Goings earned approximately $7.6 million in total compensation in 2016 alone, $1 million salary, $2.7 million in stock awards, $2.3 million in option awards. The board's compensation committee explicitly stated that targeting total compensation above median has been critical. The stock price went up. The executives got paid. The balance sheet hollowed out. By the time revenue decline accelerated after 2013, the company carried approximately $700 to $840 million in debt and no financial cushion to absorb the fall. Rick Goings stepped down as CEO on May 9, 2018. He became executive chairman, then retired from the board in 2019. He left behind a company that had been stripped of the capital it needed to survive. Chapter 8. 4 CEOs and a pandemic. After Goings departed, Tupperware cycled through 4 CEOs in 6 years. In corporate life, there is no clearer signal of organizational distress. Patricia "Tricia" Stitzel had been with the company since 1997. She became the first female CEO in May 2018 and acknowledged the core problem openly. People just don't have connection with the brand anymore. Her tenure was brief. Board member Christopher O'Leary stepped in as interim CEO. Miguel Fernandez came next, a Mexican-born executive with an MBA from the University of Virginia's Darden School and a decade at Herbalife, followed by a stint as global president of Avon Products. He was appointed president and CEO effective April 6, 2020. The timing was almost absurd. COVID-19 lockdowns began that same week. Fernandez was living in London and couldn't relocate to Florida immediately because embassy closures delayed his visa. He took over a struggling global enterprise from across an ocean during a pandemic and then experienced something that might have been the cruelest thing that happened to Tupperware since Brownie Wise's firing. The pandemic saved the company, briefly, temporarily, just long enough to make everyone believe it might survive. Millions of people locked in their homes started cooking. They needed food storage. The sales force pivoted rapidly to virtual parties, Zoom demonstrations, social media selling, digital tools. Nobody had bothered to build before because nobody had been forced to. Third quarter 2020, profits quadrupled to $34.4 million from $7.8 million the year before. Revenue hit $477.2 million, up 14% year over year, 21% in local currency. North American sales surged 46%. Full year 2020 net income jumped to $112.2 million from just $12.4 million in 2019. The stock told the story in its own language. From approximately $1 per share in March 2020, $1 for a company that had once traded near $100, it rocketed to $28.80 by late October. A 2,700% surge. The financial press wrote recovery stories. The sales force allowed itself to hope. It evaporated almost as quickly as it arrived. People went back to restaurants. The cooking boom ended. The virtual party, it turned out, couldn't replicate the living room. You couldn't throw a bowl across a Zoom call and hear it land. Revenue fell to $1.30 billion in 2022, down more than 18% from 2021. The sales force shrank 18% in a single year. Material weaknesses in financial reporting were discovered, requiring restatement of 2020 and 2021 results. The numbers that had looked like salvation turned out to need correction. Fernandez tried what Goings had tried 20 years earlier. He launched on Amazon in June 2022. He returned to Target in October 2022, pricing products from $7.99 to $79.99. Both moves were years, arguably decades, too late. The company's own chief restructuring officer would later state in the bankruptcy filing what everyone outside Kissimmee already knew. The company's focus on its direct sales model ultimately came at the cost of developing an omnichannel strategy or even modern e-commerce infrastructure. The number that captures the full scope of that failure is staggering. Only 13% of Tupperware's products were listed on its own website. 87%, including, as the filing noted, some of Tupperware's most beloved products, were invisible to anyone shopping online. The e-commerce site itself didn't launch until February 2021. Direct selling still drove over 90% of sales in 2023. A company built on human demonstration couldn't figure out how to demonstrate anything to anyone through a screen. The burp, that satisfying hiss that could only be experienced in person, had become a metaphor for everything Tupperware couldn't translate. On April 7, 2023, the company issued the statement that sealed its fate. There is substantial doubt about the company's ability to continue as a going concern. The stock crashed approximately 50% in a single day. What happened next was bizarre and sad, and perfectly of its moment. In July 2023, with the stock at its 52-week low of 61 cents, Reddit retail traders discovered Tupperware as a short squeeze candidate, 23.2% short interest with over 11 days to cover. The stock surged more than 450% in a month, briefly exceeding $4. This will be the next big short squeeze. I went all in yesterday, one Reddit user posted. Trading volume hit 3 times the 30-day average. On August 3rd, Tupperware announced a debt restructuring that reduced interest obligations by $150 million and secured $21 million in new financing, giving the rally a justification that arrived after the fact. The stock collapsed again within weeks. The meme traders moved on. The company remained dying. Lori-Ann Goldman was the last hope. The former CEO of Spanx, she'd transformed it from a startup into a billion-dollar brand, and former CEO of New Avon, where she'd facilitated its sale to Korean conglomerate LG. She was appointed CEO on October 17, 2023, a proven turnaround executive with direct sales experience. If anyone could save Tupperware, it was Goldman. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. You can't turn around a company that spent $1 billion buying back its own stock instead of building an e-commerce platform, that missed the glass container revolution by 20 years, that listed only 13% of its products online, and that had cycled through 4 leaders in 6 years, while the sales force shrank by more than 90% from its peak. Goldman walked into a building where the structural supports had already been removed. The question wasn't whether it would fall. It was when. Chapter 9, Bankruptcy Eve. On September 17, 2024, Tupperware Brands Corporation filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in the U.S. Bankruptcy Court for the District of Delaware. Case number 24-12156. Judge Brendan Shannon presiding. The filing listed estimated assets of $679.5 million, estimated liabilities exceeding $1.2 billion, funded debt of $811.8 million, between 50,001 and 100,000 creditors. Lori-Ann Goldman's statement read, in part, that the company's financial position had been severely impacted by the challenging macroeconomic environment, and that bankruptcy was meant to provide essential flexibility as Tupperware pursued transformation into a digital-first, technology-led company. The language was boilerplate. The reality was a carcass. 2 pre-bankruptcy marketing processes had contacted approximately 170 potential investors. Only one comprehensive whole company bid materialized. The stock was suspended from NYSE trading on September 18th. It began trading on the OTC expert market under the symbol TUPBQ. Formal delisting came October 15, 2024. The stock that had peaked near $96 per share in December 2013 would trade at 2 cents by mid-2025. Spencer Winters, the attorney representing Tupperware in bankruptcy court, described the situation as one in urgent need of a vast global resolution. Neil Saunders of Global Data delivered the verdict the numbers already told. The reality is that the decline at Tupperware is not new. It is very difficult to see how the brand can get back to its glory days. At the Hemingway, South Carolina plant, the economic bedrock of that small PD region town for nearly 50 years, a warn notice had already been filed on June 11, 2024, for permanent closure. Of the 148 remaining workers, down from a peak of 1,300, layoffs came in waves, September 28 through January 14, 2025, with final departure set for June 13, 2025. The roles eliminated told you exactly who had kept that plant running. 26 order inspectors, 31 material handlers, 14 packing operators, 21 production associates, 14 technicians. The plant had been sold for $15 million to Phoenix Investors, LLC in October 2023 and leased back. Production shifted to Lerma, Mexico. Hemingway had already suffered cuts before, 250 jobs in 2005, half the workforce with earlier rounds in 1994 and 2003. But this was the end. At the Kissimmee headquarters, 145 employees were laid off effective December 31, 2024. A warn letter was sent to Orlando Mayor Buddy Dyer. The 43-acre campus, sold in a 2020 sale-leaseback, flipped through 2 more ownership changes, eventually landing with realty income through its $9.3 billion acquisition of Spirit Realty Capital, was listed for sale by CBRE in 2025. 6 buildings, approximately 216,600 square feet. Potential reuse, warehousing, manufacturing, or cold storage. The Confidence Center Museum, the Friendship Fountain, the Performing Arts Center where 600 women once dug for mink stoles in the Florida dirt. Offered for potential reuse as cold storage. The surrounding 740 acres of former Tupperware land had been sold between 2020 and 2021 for approximately $37 million. The buyer, O'Connor Capital Partners, planned a transit-oriented mixed-use development near the Tupperware Sunrail Station, a commuter rail stop that still bears the company's name. The company is gone. The train stop remains, carrying passengers past the ghost of something they may never have heard of. Chapter 10. Sold for parts. Party Products, LLC, an entity formed by a group of Tupperware's own secured lenders who had purchased debt at distressed prices in July 2024, acquired the brand. The lender group comprised Stonehill Capital Management out of New York, Alden Global Capital out of West Palm Beach, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, and Strategic Investment Group. Together, they held $462.7 million, 57% of the approximately $817 million in pre-petition secured debt. The purchase price was $23.5 million in cash, plus $63 million in debt relief. That number deserves a moment of stillness. A company that had generated $2.67 billion in annual revenue 11 years earlier. A company with 3.1 million sellers in 100 countries. A company whose stock had traded near $96 per share. Sold for $23.5 million, roughly the price of a nice apartment building in Manhattan. Judge Brendan Shannon approved the sale. It closed November 27, 2024, the day before Thanksgiving. Party Products announced continued operations in what it called core markets: the United States, Canada, Mexico, Brazil, China, Korea, India, and Malaysia. using independent consultants, e-commerce, and retail. It promised a startup mentality using agile methodology. In November 2025, it expanded a glass bakeware collection called Voila. The remaining corporate assets entered a liquidating trust under a joint Chapter 11 plan, filed March 6, 2025. The sales force at the end told the final story. At peak, approximately 3.1 million people sold Tupperware worldwide. By 2020, roughly 600,000 remained active. At the time of the bankruptcy filing, court documents listed approximately 465,000 sellers, with reports putting the active count at approximately 284,000. Nearly half of those remaining were concentrated in South America. The party model that Brownie Wise invented in a living room in Detroit in 1948, the engine that powered a multi-billion-dollar global empire, had, by the end, become the company's most debilitating liability. The thing that built it was the thing that trapped it. The lenders who bought the wreckage, Stonehill Capital, Alden Global, Bank of America, are the only actors in this 8-decade story who got exactly what they calculated for. They purchased debt at pennies on the dollar, formed an acquisition vehicle, and bought an American icon for less than the price of its own parking lot. The spreadsheet. 1. Chapter 11. What the containers remember. The vintage Tupperware market is thriving in the strangest places. Etsy shops, eBay auctions, Facebook collector groups with thousands of members trading Harvest Gold canisters and frosted crystal bowls. Complete 1950s Wonderlier sets in excellent condition sell for approximately $175. Salt and pepper shaker sets command $50 to $200. Full line sets in rare colors fetch hundreds. Pink pieces are especially prized. The color faded easily, making survivors rare. People pay more for a used Tupperware bowl from 1954 than they'd pay for a brand new set from 2023. The Smithsonian's National Museum of American History holds over 100 pieces dating from 1946 to 1999, alongside the Earl Tupper and Brownie Wise archival collections. MoMA retains early pieces in its permanent collection, though the plastic has deteriorated, discolored and disfigured, no longer displayed. Syracuse University holds the largest Tupperware collection. The product outlasted the institution that studied it too. Perhaps the most resonant voice in the entire history of this company doesn't belong to an executive or a biographer or a financial analyst. It belongs to Lorna Boyd, whose mother sold Tupperware in the 1960s. Tupperware took those moms out of the kitchen where they were supposed to be, Boyd said, and let them enter the workforce and let them have something outside the home. Or Lee Walker, the Filipino war bride who couldn't get a teaching job because of her accent, who found Tupperware in July 1953 and found independence with it. It was like a fairy tale, she said, like you're in a wonderland. The fairy tale ended. The wonderland was sold for $23.5 million to a group of lenders who'd never hosted a party, never thrown a bowl across a living room, never heard the burp. An indestructible product built a company that was destroyed, not by a single disaster, but by a long series of choices. Patents that expired while the company refused to diversify, a sales model that couldn't survive the world it helped create, because the women it empowered went on to build lives that no longer included Tuesday afternoon parties. $1 billion in buybacks spent at peak prices on borrowed money. An e-commerce site that arrived 25 years after Amazon. 4 CEOs in 6 years. And a seal. A brilliant, patented, irreplaceable seal that required human hands and human presence in a world that stopped showing up in person. The containers, though. The Harvest Gold canisters. the frosted crystal bowls, the lettuce keepers and the servilier lids and the party Susans that sat at the center of 1,000 kitchen tables. Those are still here, in kitchens and thrift shops and Smithsonian display cases, airtight, unbreakable, outlasting the empire that made them and the women who sold them and the executives who hollowed them out and the lenders who picked over the remains. Somewhere in an American kitchen right now, someone is pressing a lid down on a 50-year-old Tupperware bowl, lifting one edge, hearing that small, soft hiss of air, the burp, the sound of a seal forming, the sound of something engineered to last. The bowl will keep. It always has. It's the company that couldn't.